and no one talks. And then information gets lost, and then that's how people get hurt and change doesn't happen. So our idea is to... Is there any questions about that? There's a few people shaking their heads as if that's not true. No? No? Okay, Grant. If there are any questions, fire it at me, because that's, I believe that you should be able to have these dialogues. Because if we can't talk about them as either, say, students or me or professionals, how are we ever expected to have families to have conversations without it turning violent? We should be able to have these conversations. And what I'm also not saying is that there isn't a place for women's only services or men only services. Of course there is. But there's other situations where they're not going to work. And I've seen that firsthand countless times. And one thing that I may have said to you last time, but I'll say it to you again because it's really, really important, is that our stance and my stance is that children always experience violence. They always know it's going on. And I don't say they witness violence or they're impacted by violence, because I think that witness makes them a very passive recipient of the violence, that they're just kind of taking it in. Oh, I just witnessed that, I saw mum and dad fighting. You don't just see your mum and dad fighting. And at the minute we have 37.7% of families have a real threat of death in them. So that could be mum ended up in intensive care, his dad tried to put a knife through the back of her head, or it can be just such severe assault or isolation or starvation that it's an actual real thing that they may die. So if you're seeing that level of violence as a child and also you're experiencing it yourself, that isn't just something you cognitively kind of rational out. You experience it in your body. And I would use the word soul. There's a lot of clients that use it, not in a religious sense. Violence and dollars and charity service, we're totally non-religious in that regard. Otherwise I wouldn't be there, to be honest. But it affects the way they sleep, it affects the way kids sleep, it affects the way they eat, it affects how much they can concentrate, it affects the way their amygdala, which is a little part of your brain that triggers your flight, fight, freeze. It affects the way that works, and it's often overcharged, so they're constantly on hyper alert or shut down, under aroused emotionally. And then we wonder why kids aren't just seeing this. It's affecting them in every single way. And I'm sure Marie would have covered some of the effects of children with domestic violence. So it's more important than they just saw this. They experience it. And even when they're not there, I don't know if any of you, when you're younger, if you can remember, or if you've ever gone into your boss to look for a day off and you just walk into their office and they're in a hisser of a mood, you just know something's up and you go, you know what, forget it, I'm going to walk out. Well, kids pick up on that as well. So even if they're at school and they're not affected, they still need to come home to that house. So they're going to pick up on that, and we know neurologically that does impact on their brain. I'm not going to go through this because you should all know what domestic violence is. You can all read that, you're all intelligent enough. We go through this with an awful lot of clients in the very first sitting because most of them wouldn't know the ins and outs of all domestic violence. And I also think it's important for us all to know what we're talking about. I'm not just talking about a black eye, because that's what most people I think in society would know. A woman with a black eye is domestic violence, like all the posters we see. But it's more to it. And there's countless amount of women that I've sat with that hadn't realised that there was some of this emotional abuse, the financial, the sexual violence. Most people would understand that violent rape is sexual violence, but then coercion into it or pressure into sex. And I think the other thing when we're talking about intimate partner violence, and you'll see that in the literature, domestic violence, domestic abuse, IPV is interchangeable. It's not only what someone does, but it's also what they don't do. And I think that's really, really, really important to focus on, and something that Marie points out a lot if something like that came up in an exam. It would be important to note. So the removal of things, or the refusal to do things, it can be as blatant as I'm just not helping in the house. And I actually am working with, meeting her this afternoon, a woman who gets zero help in the home. And on the outside, that's very hard to show that that's abusive, and sometimes that's what happens in other families by agreement. But this woman's getting up at about 4:30 in the morning to tidy up after her partner. They're not in a relationship, but still in the same house because of financial reasons. That's financial violence from him. So he's not doing anything. But that puts more pressure on man to do everything. He's not even disciplining his children, 10 and 11-year-olds. Now, sometimes people will be like, oh, look, it doesn't matter if mums or dads are harsh or one's a disciplinarian. But then this is then impacting a mom's relationship, because she's the one that says, you have to do your homework, you have to sign your homework, and then dad says, go on, do whatever. Come on, put a coat on, it's raining out, and dad says, you can do whatever you want. Constantly undermining her, constantly. He's not doing anything in the classic punching sense or things like that, but he's removing support from mum in that way, to the point where she's literally at breaking point. So we need to be very careful that it's not just something you do, but it's something maybe you don't do intentionally. Very quickly, we work on a risk needs responsivity. I believe that resources should follow risk. So we don't treat every single family the exact same, because there's obviously different variations in risk and violence. The risk principle asserts that criminal behaviour can be reliably predicted, and treatment should focus on higher risk offenders. Does anyone disagree that people can change? No? Okay. Because I firmly believe that everyone can. I think there's certain times where I said, you know what, this isn't for you at this stage. You're not going to change. There's too many contraindicators to therapeutic work, something that Marie would also talk about a lot. There are times you have to say, not right now. But I don't believe any child is born evil. There's circumstances that lead to you behaving the way you are, and we can accurately predict them. The risk assessment we use, the SARA, SARAB3, is the most reliable and up-to-date predictor of likelihood of future violence. And that's at 0.71 AUC, which is about as reliable as you can get in the social sciences. So we can predict certain things about behaviour. Does that make sense to people? Yeah? Okay. And the need principle is also something that's very important in this, that highlights the importance of criminogenic needs in the design and delivery. In other words, we're not just doing whatever we want. It's not Dave just coming in and going, you know what, I think we need to talk about your past today. We focus on very specific target issues, either static or dynamic, that we can either process the static ones, like their past. One of the risk factors for perpetrators would be their past abuse of childhood, maybe. Some of the stories I've heard from some of those men, you'd actually sit there and go, oh, okay, it's starting to make sense now. I don't know how you got this far in life, to be honest. That's not excusing their behaviour. Absolutely zero excuse. But I take the very CBT approach that I separate the person from the behaviour. Because we all know that in any therapeutic intervention, the relationship between the practitioner and the client is the most important, not actually the modality that they're using. So if these men come in and they didn't trust or have a relationship with me in a positive way, how are we ever going to help keep their children and their partner or ex-partner safe? Does anyone not agree with that either? Usually people are shaking their heads like you shouldn't be working with these scumbags, murderers. No? Okay. Or is it just that it's 10 a.m. and none of you could be bothered from your opinion out? Right, okay. I'm with you. Criminogenic needs are characteristics, traits and problems of an individual that relate to their likelihood to reoffend. So again, it's not us just doing whatever we want. There's dynamic factors which are changeable, and then there's static ones, which are their, a lot of the lads I would work with have been horrifically abused in their childhood. In fact, I'm yet to meet in this service one man that didn't have a horrifically traumatized background. Not one. And even the guys, now this cuts across, domestic violence cuts across everyone. I have people that have 3 Range Rovers and they pull up in a different Range Rover every week, and I'm like, what am I doing wrong in my life? Why am I not driving 3 Range Rovers? But they might be doing well, but when you actually delve into their past and you see what they experienced and that their parents were horrifically violent to each other, that's how they learn conflict resolution, and now that's what they're teaching their children. It starts to make sense. And I think by addressing these criminogenic needs, they're vital for effective treatment, because an awful lot of practitioners, an awful lot of social workers, I would have been guilty of it before maybe. No, definitely. Just kind of doing what you think is good, rather than what you know will absolutely work. And sometimes the former will work, but I'd argue that makes no sense when you know something else will work. One thing before I get into the systemic nature, which again, Marie is a systemic therapist, so she really, really likes this type of work. That's not why I'm here, but also just for yourselves in essays and exams. How are you graded in this module? Is it exam? Exam. Something to really know. She likes narrative therapy, something we do. She also likes systemic therapy, because we know it works. And she also believes in working with perpetrators, although you have to discuss the use of language of perpetrators and labelling theory. That's another thing she's very, very in the forefront of. Do we call these men perpetrators or not? I'm using it here just for ease of reference. But I'd never call men that come to the place perpetrators. Because now you're a perpetrator, and that's you forever. And also, most of them have never been convicted of it. So what gives me the right to say that? I'll address you by your name. Hi, Dave. And any man that walks through, no matter how violent they be, they're greeted with a warm welcome, smile, hello, do you want a cup of tea and a biscuit or a cup of coffee or whatever. Because if we don't work in collaboration with you, even if it's a come in and fuck you, Dave, I'm not working with you, at least now we know where that man stands and we can comment on risk to help keep that woman safe and her children safe. So why work with those who act violently? There's very few. There's about 2 programs in the whole country, so there's very few programs that will work with them. And I think it's a dual role. A lot of the time we see these men as violent partners. And yes, they are violent partners, or have been violent partners. But there's also a duality in that all the people that are referred to us are parents, or in a parental role. They might be stepdad or something like that. But that's a dual role. And it might be very hard to get your head around, but you can be a quite decent dad, excluding the violence piece, and a terrible partner at the same time. And this couple are going to be intrinsically linked forever until the children are 18 legally anyway, because they have children. And sometimes it's about reflecting back to this man, not only, how do you remember your parents? And a lot of the time, like I said, it's awful, and it's quite upsetting to go through that, and we may be the first people to ever ask them, what was life like for you? But also that they have a responsibility as parents. How would you like your children to remember you? Is this how you want them to remember you? And that's something that always gets them. It's like, ooh. And usually it's like, I'd stop any man that ever did that to my daughter. Because statistically, we can tell you that your daughter's more than likely going to be a victim of domestic violence, and your son is more than likely going to be a perpetrator. And you can say that with confidence across all races, religion, colours, creeds, countries, doesn't matter. No demographic matters. That's more than likely going to happen unless there's an intervention and this continues. And most men will say, oh, well, I'd stop any man. Well, no one was out to stop you. And now you're tapping into their parental role. And if they can't start to think reflectively like that, then they don't really have empathic skills, and then that's one contraindicator to working. You can't accept responsibility, and if you can't show any kind of understanding or reflexivity or empathy towards the victims or your children or whatever, then that's something where you can say, well, this work isn't for you right now, and you're actually a huge risk to your family and other women.
But it can go the other way as well, though. As in, the children would look at them and say, I don't want to be like them, type thing, no?
It can, yeah, it absolutely can, but it's very hard for them to do that. Especially when you have 2 parents that are constantly fighting all the time. And even when they're not fighting, you're waiting on the fighting. That's the problem. Most kids are waiting on things to happen when they see me. They're just kind of... And walking on eggshells, I hate using that phrase, but it comes up all the time. A lot of families use it. They literally prefer to be punched than just kind of waiting around on things to happen. And it's that level of anxiety. It's almost like you go into an exam that you know is going to get you a job or not, and you've never read it, never gone to a lecture, never studied, multiplied by 1 billion. In fact, we know that neurologically that children feel emotions about 4 to 9 times higher than us, which is their flight, fight, freeze. If you've ever stood out and nearly got smacked with a car and you had that surge in your body of, ooh, that was close, that's the level of cortisol and stuff that's being flooded through these children's brains. So the chances of them going to the other side of I'm never staying away from that is actually stacked against them. Totally possible, but they definitely need a hand most of the time. Because not only are they experiencing violence, this then impacts on their school, their play, which is how children learn and develop, their food intake and how they digest food, which then affects their brain and their growth and their brain development. So it's really stacked against them. But yeah, of course, it's absolutely possible. Is that all right?
Mm.
Yeah. I think the other thing is historically agencies haven't challenged perpetrators. I remember being in the social work, I was a social work team leader, and I came across this man who was on his 9th partner, who's 9 times horrifically violent to each and every single one of them. And every single time, Dad, get out of the house, Mom, okay, you're safe. It's the short summary of the intervention. And that's it. So you're violent to these people. You're asked to leave to keep this family safe, which is absolutely appropriate, I think. But then you just go off and do it again. What are we actually doing? So when people say you shouldn't work with these men, I think it's a preventative thing as well. It's not about giving perpetrators services that victims don't get. It's about preventing future victims, hopefully. And a key tactic of perpetrators is to isolate victims from any kind of support, personal or professional, and services. So their job is, the perpetrator's job is to make the victim's world smaller, and our job is to make it bigger. So by not engaging with them, we're further just aligning ourselves with them. This is something, and giving off the message that you're actually too powerful. Because domestic violence is always just broken down to power and control anyway. So we're just sending off the message that, you know what, we can't deal with you, we can't help you, we can't change you, you're too powerful, you're too violent, you're too scary, you go and do your thing. And we're just reinforcing whatever they're doing, because it's working then. And also if we're working with them, we can identify contraindications to therapeutic work. Because a lot of the men that come in are charming to me, absolutely charming, the type of person that you'd introduce to someone. They're not this chaotic man that comes in, you're like, ooh, stay away from that guy. Absolutely not.
It's
Manipulation, yeah, absolutely. They'll come in dressed like this. You know what I mean, Dave, those women, little things like that. No, I don't know what you mean. What are you talking about? Ah, you know yourself. No. Little things like that. They're always trying to get me on side because of a penis, I guess. You know, that's the reality. Me and you, we're pals. These women are against us. Little subtle things are just making you think that maybe she's a liar. Maybe she's a liar. But the most important thing for any of these women is to believe, and you can spot it a mile away when you have enough practice. The other reason why we work with men who act violently, or anyone, is that it's part of the new Domestic Violence Act, and it's part of the Istanbul Convention, which we've ratified. I won't bore you to death with that, but essentially it's a legal part of our country, and logically it makes no sense. I think only working with a woman is victim blaming in itself. So not only do you have to leave a relationship a lot of the time, and you have to go into a refuge. And just to be clear, refuges do amazing work, but I wouldn't want to live there. If you've ever been in a refuge, they do their absolute best, but it's not a place you'd want to be. No one would choose to go and live there. Or they have to go then into homeless services. Again, they do great work, but I don't want to live in a hotel. I've been to those hotels, and sometimes it's like Baghdad. It's mental. So we're making her leave this home in her life because of abuse of this man, and then she has to go to all the therapy services, and she has to bring her children to school, and she has to mind her children in one room, and she has to get her children to therapeutic services because they want to make sure that their children are okay because they're a good mother. And your man's off having pints. Well, what are we doing? Why are we making this woman do absolutely everything because she's been a victim of violence? Why are we not addressing the core issue? Very briefly about our service again. Our job isn't to keep families together. That's not our job. Our job is safety. But an awful lot of women don't want to leave the relationship or avoid. They think they can fix it. They're not ready to leave. We also know that leaving is one of the most dangerous times for women. That a lot of the time they'll leave and come back, maybe because of just financial pressure, or even that they're stuck in the same house. I think I checked yesterday, about 40% of my cases and 60% of cases across the service that are open, they're not in a relationship, but stuck in the same house financially. Now, that is a nightmare for people who can even have a dialogue. For people who can have a dialogue, I don't know if anyone's ever been in that situation or even rented rooms in a house with other people that you just couldn't tolerate. it's really, really tough. And then throw kids in the middle, and then throw the dynamic of parent control and violence into it. So I'll always meet the victim first for a number of sessions to assess safety and do safety planning. Then when it's safe to do so, we'll bring the man in and start going through that. We don't share information that way. Then only when it's safe to do so, there's someone to therapeutically hold the child. Because if you start unpacking the work, like I was talking about you working with children, that was with you, yeah? Yeah? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Very memorable, thanks. When you start working with the child, it can make them emotionally unstable for a while, so we need someone to be there to be able to hold them at home or wherever they're living. And I think it's important to explore their individual roles and personal responsibilities to ensure safety. Now that's often a thorny issue, talking about personal responsibilities when we're talking about victims sometimes. And there's sometimes victim vulnerability factors that we would work with. That doesn't mean it's their fault. That doesn't mean it's their fault. There's certain things that make women more vulnerable